My name, yes, Camille. So my name is Sandy Lentuli. I'm not Franny, as it says on your screen. My name is Sandy Lentuli, and I'm with the youth group today called Justice for Jaws. We are a youth group very passionate about shark conservation and changing the human perceptions towards sharks, the negative perceptions to be exact, around sharks. And we are trying to work with like-minded organizations to spread awareness about sharks and get more protection in the country for these species, sharks, rays, and chimeras. I'm not alone. I'm with all of you. And I'm accompanied by two of my fellow members in the group. We have Julia, who is here, and we have Kizia. Kizia there, she's waving at you guys. So we are going to be the facilitators for this cafe or discussion, right, Chair? And how we're going to go about it is we're going to try and capture everything or the key points that come out of this and give a summary, which I think will be given at the end of the symposium, just to get a general idea of what we discussed and what are the key points that can be used or that can give life to other topics in the future. So just broadly there. So how we want to run this is you guys are coming up with the discussions. We are not leading the discussion. We are just mainly here to facilitate and pitch in where we can and ask questions where we do not understand. So the main leaders of the discussion is all of you guys here. Okay, and you would have seen that we have a topic posted that is protecting species across land and sea or along those lines. So that's what we're going to be discussing today, the need to protect, the challenges faced in protecting between these two land masses, land and sea. So I know a number of you here are working very closely with communities, and a number of you are fishermen and working with fishermen. So I can already see dynamics there happening with the challenges and all of those. So those are the things we want to get an idea of. How can we better manage or better protect our species? Should we even be protecting them? So those are all the questions. I'm just throwing everything at you, and Julia and Kizia will just pull me back here, and then we'll just go into it. So yeah, Julia, Kizia, over to you, and then we will open the floor to everyone.
Thanks, Sandile. Yeah, I think this is a really fun topic because it can definitely foster a lot of discussion, no matter where your kind of viewpoint is. Being a bunny hugger myself, definitely am all for conservation and definitely think that it needs to happen across land and sea. So I'm interested to see what other people think and what some of your that could maybe go towards planning and, like you say, improving conservation areas and maybe helping to integrate conservation across land and sea. Because from my understanding, while we have conservation areas that are on land and we have conservation areas at sea, they're not really linked or integrated, which I think would be an awesome goal. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to see what everyone else has to think about that and to see if we can maybe all share some ideas.
Thanks, Julia. I'm also really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say and some thoughts. Something that I find very interesting and what Julia pointed out is, we have these conservation areas on land and limited conservation areas in comparison to terrestrial in the sea. But the connectivity between the two of them is quite important, especially for biodiversity and ecosystem services. They facilitate migration, hydrological cycles, nutrient transport, and climatic processes. And there's very little focus on, connecting the two, especially in terms of conservation. So yeah, I look forward to hearing what everyone else thinks.
Right. Thank you, guys. And with that, I'd like to open the floor. So we've posted quite a number of ideas or questions, points of interest. So I think something there should tickle your thoughts. I will open the floor to anyone who has something to say along those lines, and we go from here. The Armstrong has his hand up.
Oh, hi, Sandile team. I'll try to be brief as I can. I just have this question because I've been sitting in and listening into different talks from yesterday until today. So for me, I do realize the importance of having these conservation efforts towards protecting our species, but also how do we link that to the global drive to the blue economy, which is coming in hot in terms of the increasing pressure to understand the marine ecosystem, but not only to understand the marine ecosystem in terms of protecting or conserving it. Excuse me.
Okay, we lost you there a bit, Armstrong, towards the last end. But what I'm picking up from your topic, yes, Armstrong.
That was just some background noise. I'll try to be brief because it's afternoon in this house, so so yeah. For me, it's like, how do we link our conservation efforts, particularly in the African context, to the global to the global needs? Because I think many more, I would say, funders in this instance are trying to push different conservation efforts, but not in the sense of trying to protect the species, but looking into how can we exploit more from the marine ecosystems, which in the long run impacts the species that are moving across the marine environment. So how do we link our conservation efforts in the African context with the global efforts, which are seemingly trying to put more pressure on our systems that we still consider as pristine, untouched? We have so many minerals in our ocean that haven't been explored. We have so many things that haven't been touched. So all of that, how long can we link those conservation efforts, not only protecting them, but protecting them from the global pressure that is coming to our end, because they're trying to provide us with funds, because we live in Africa, so they assume we need money and support and stuff like that. So how do we link our conservation efforts from that global pressure that is coming to our end? I hope I'm making sense. If I'm not, I do apologize.
I understood you, and I might say, you have some thought-provoking and provocative questions there. So I think by no means do I have the answer to them, I can pitch in, but before I do, I think, yeah, anyone wants to have a bite at this? Okay, my screen is not beeping with takers. So I think in that situation right there, Armstrong, I think this this question would very much link in with another conservation cafe. I think it's happening on Thursday, or hosted by Youth for MPAs, mainly for one, because it's tackling mostly what's happening in the marine environment only. And how I'm getting your question is it's also hinting at the 30 by 30 protection for marine protection drive. So it's hinting along those lines. I don't know if you're intentionally hinting at that, but I got a hint towards there as well. So I think as a country, or as African countries, we need to have conservation that works for us. So conservation is not the same everywhere. So I saw a question that comes from Camille here. If you check your chat, that how much of South African protected areas, so are there coastal protected areas designated already? So where I'm going there is that even protected areas themselves are different. And exclusion zones you see the different types of protection levels going on there. Moreover, from that, you also have areas which are called community protection areas, so or community managed areas. So it's not an official MPA or marine protected area, but it's an area of important conservation that's managed by a specific community. So how do you factor those protection areas into the broadly recognized marine protection, marine protected areas, because they are areas of protection. So with that, I want to say, I think for African countries or African, for Africans or African countries, we need to have protection or marine protection or conservation areas that address our needs or our issues. Our issues are not the same as everyone. No issue is the same around. So we have those issues which are global, and then we have issues specific to areas. So our protection should, I think, revolve around those specific needs for our people, specific needs for our marine or our environment. So what do we need to protect more? How can we protect that more? What do people need? Do people need, people always need food, but then what can we prioritize? Do we prioritize the monetary gain that is associated with signing our ocean rights away, or do we prioritize protection for the area in looking for other gains that come with having that protection area in place? So yeah, I don't know if I answer you there, but that's my thought there. I have, oh yes, Julia.
Just to add, I completely agree. And okay, it says my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully I don't break up.
I can hear you.
Perfect. And also just that's what you said. We as African countries need to work to assign value to conservation areas. So if another country comes and says, we're willing to pay you this much to fish through your ocean, through the economic exclusion zone, we need to put measures in place to say, well, actually, through conservation areas, we can derive more value. We can make our country more money through maybe through, like Sandile mentioned, community driven conservation. And in that way, we'll be able to kind of maybe negate some that we are getting from other countries. So if we create and we place more value in our conservation areas, then when we are put under pressure and other countries come and want to exploit our minerals and our fishes and our stocks and that kind of thing, we can turn around and say, actually, we don't need your money because through our conservation areas, we derive value and we're creating value through other resources that do conserve our species, but also ensure, the country's making money and fish stocks are protected. I hope I'm making sense.
100% agree with you there, Julia. Yes. So I don't know if there's any questions, any suggestions. Oh yes, Kezia.
There was a hand up, but it seems to have disappeared.
Okay. So I think there's another question from Masha that very much links with what I think our opening statement was. So the need for more transdisciplinary approaches. So how can we be more proactive? She also links at collaborations and partnerships across sectors being key to creating more effective solutions to protect our species. I see Zwagele has a hand up, and then we'll come back to Marsha's point. Zwagele, fire away.
Afternoon, colleagues.
Afternoon.
And my name is Zwela Kezon, not
Zwela, it's my apologies about that.
No worries. So I'm an employee. I work for Sanbi. If you guys know Sanbi, and I've just been listening, and in my head I'm thinking maybe in our topic we should firstly determine why do we need to protect our species. We protect our species from international big countries, the big role player countries, the first world countries, or we're protecting our resources from South Africans themselves. I'm not going to say Africa, I'm going to speak in the context of South Africa. Because what I've noticed is that particularly, I'm not so inclined with marine work. I'm mostly involved with work in landscapes. So, for example, there's a lot of not so happy people that live around protected areas. For example, if let's say a community around Hluhluwe or Kruger. Now, those people are not happy because obviously they were displaced from the protected area, or their ancestors were displaced from protected areas so that protected area can be established. Now, the question again is, are we protecting the resources from our people or from international countries or the international pressures? Because for one, if we're protecting them from our people, for me, that's the major problem, because South Africa is a country that promotes sustainable use of natural resources, therefore allowing anyone who wants to, for example, go fishing, You need to have a certain size mesh, or you can fish a certain size fish, etc. But a lot of protected areas don't even allow, you're not allowed to fish in a protected area. So it automatically excludes us as South Africans not to use their natural resources. The issue on big countries, for me, that's more of a political playground. Because as conservationists, we can say, okay, no, you cannot protect, you cannot fish in this, you cannot do that. However, if China comes up with $10 billion and gives the president, I believe you me now, regardless what conservationists say, that there'll be work done in that protected area, or there'll be mining or fracking or shale gas as extraction. So for international issues, that's for a more political thing. But if we bring it home, where we're talking about our own people who are not allowed to go fishing or go collect wood for fire in a particular protected area, for me, how do we deal with that? Because I feel like as South Africans, we need to get access, or be given access to be allowed to go into protected areas and sustainably harvest whatever that we need. There's a lot of, for example, medicinal plants that are within protected areas, and a lot of our traditional medicine practitioners need access to these plants. However, because now a land is proclaimed as a protected area, they're not allowed to go into these areas and collect. And that also affects the livelihoods of those traditional medicine practitioners, and also people that use traditional medicine or believe in traditional medicine over Western medicine. So that's why I say, can we just determine what are we protecting and from whom are we protecting it? And I've read a paper recently just looking at how effective are protected areas. And what I've noticed is that, or what I've gathered from that paper, was that a lot of our protected areas are not really effective because they don't really protect the species. I mean, rhinos still get poached in Kruger or in Hluhluwe or wherever. So are they really effective or not? So yeah, I don't know if I'm also making sense, but it's quite tricky, guys, with this protection thing. However, I'm a believer in sustainable use, and South Africa is a sustainable using country, Now, if we protect everything and stop everyone from using biological resources, that contradicts what South Africa stands for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you nailed it spot on. What a hammer to the nail. I don't know what the English saying is, but yeah, completely agree with you, Zwelakhe. And we had another topic which we were coming to if time allowed, but I think you've just opened it up. So, which was around protection areas. I'll just read it so as not to mess with. So it was saying protection or exclusion. Protected areas, really areas of conservation or areas of exclusion for the less fortunate. And for me, that's what you just touched on there. We need to be very clear about what our protection is on. Are we protecting the area from the people who are local or around that area, or are we protecting it from a big corporation or big countries coming in? So I'll just leave it there and go to, I saw there was a hand up from Corina. Yes.
Hi, yeah. I'm not sure if I'm in the right going in the right direction here, but to agree with our previous speaker, I do believe that partnership with communities will help us determine what we need to conserve and protect, because the local communities are able to educate us as much as we are able to educate them on the areas of indigenous plants, biodiversity. And by gaining as much indigenous knowledge from the communities, we are then able to help them to help us protect areas. We are then providing jobs and also creating income. And I think that will help us to effectively manage small areas and protection zones. Thank you.
Definitely. So I think that we as conservationists awoke late to this fact that conservation is not separate from the people or from the communities. Essentially, when we're coming and saying we're conserving species, we're conserving species that they've been living with for generations. And they've been, I like to believe, sustainably using it if it's a species they're using, if it's a resource they're using. And for us, it's just applying our teachings to them. And you cannot superimpose your thoughts when working with communities. Firstly, you are in their area. Secondly, you cannot come as, I'll call this, for lack of a better word, smarty pants, and think you know everything. Essentially, when we go into areas, community areas, we are there to learn. Science is a learning process throughout. You know, you don't know things, and science should be, if your science is not questionable or falsifiable, then it's not science. So, but by virtue of that, science can change. So we can say something is this today, and then 10 years later we realize, no, we couldn't have been so wrong. So, you know, and then you change your science, you change your findings, and you inform your policies if your science is informing policy, or you inform your decisions around that science. So by virtue, science should always evolve with new information. So you cannot just take whatever information and just superimpose it to the communities. What about that indigenous knowledge that they have? So collaboration, going back to this point, protecting land across land and sea, we need to be cognizant that people are not stupid, people are not fools. People are living within these areas, and they probably know more about them more than us. So there needs to be a collaboration between us. So us as the conservationists and the community, those are just two stakeholders. There are that can even the number of stakeholders in protection areas quickly grows up from just that. So you need to be cognizant of the different stakeholders interested or involved in that conservation effort. Yeah. Yes. I'll mute myself now, and yeah. Armstrong, you are back.
Yes. Just to continue. I think it's I like that for us, when I say for us, this particular generation of conservationists, we are realizing that the way that was done, conservation was done before, wasn't the way that it should have been done. So I think it's important to note that we are conscientizing ourselves to understand that people are, and the communities are at the forefront of everything that is being done. Because sometimes you may come or be working for an NGO or a company, you're not necessarily living in that particular area. So the people that actually live there are the people that can be able to protect the resource more than you telling them what to do. So I think we also need to drive this message forward in protecting our species between land and sea, to say, in as much as we are different in our disciplinaries or anything like that. We are united in our own in difference as well, because it's the goal is way bigger than what we think or what we try to articulate at any given point in time. So I think in as much as we try to run away from certain issues that are related to human conflicts, that are related to politics, we should also try to educate ourselves as well to understand these different dynamics, because we may try to have different projects that are being rolled out or have any conservation efforts that are being rolled out to different communities to protect the various species across land and sea. But if we are running away from the human factor of everything else, we run the risk of having anyone come to a pristine or protected area and convince the community to go a different direction, or just to impose a certain narrative to them. So I think also it right now it presents a great opportunity for ourselves as well to understand the different dynamics and the different stakeholders that exist in the conservation space. So I'm just listening in and just pointing that out and saying thank you that we have this group of people and young individuals that have this change in mindset of how conservation should be done in terms of engaging with the communities, but also understanding that we have more to learn from the communities than for us to teach the communities, so to say.
Thank you very much there, Armstrong. And just to bring it to everyone's attentions, there's 2 links that have been posted in the chat. So those are for whoever is interested. I think one of them highlights a success story from working with communities. So this is not just from the wind. Something is actually happening there. Zulake, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you again. Excuse me, guys. So yeah, Armstrong is echoing what we just spoke about, and I just wanted to give some examples. For example, guys, if you think about this, where with abalone poaching, it's mostly people that live around the areas, the coastal areas that do the poaching, or it's the communities. With rhino horn or elephant poaching, it will be mostly the people that live in the periphery of those nature reserves. And who are the people that are poaching? It's the people that are living in those communities, and most of these communities are disadvantaged. There's very little opportunities for employment, education, or any social development. Now, if anyone comes and says, oh, poach a rhino for me, I'll give you 10,000 rands. I mean, as a young man, we know that, and this also comes from a paper I read where societal pressures, where if you're a young man, you don't have money, no lady wants to date you. Now, these young men in these communities are broke, they don't have money, but they want to have a lady next to them. But because you don't have any of those, no lady wants you. Now, if someone says, go poach a rhino and I'll give you this much, you'll definitely go. They call themselves the patraus in Mozambique. They call them patraus, these poaching syndicates who drive 4x4s and live in nice homes, and these kids look up to them to say, one day I want to be a patrao, who are these poaching syndicates. So it's really, really imperative for conservation policy makers to involve local communities around protected areas as much as possible, because those are the people that are on the ground poaching. If you think about the CBNRM program in Namibia, so CBNRM is Community-Based National Resource Management, and it's very successful in Namibia, where the communities are the ones that They do game counts. If someone, a tourist, wants to come hunt a certain antelope, the community facilitates that. Obviously, there's a structure. It's not just a random person in the community. There's a structure that they follow, and the hunt money goes to the community and the development of the community. Schools are being built with that type of money, infrastructure, and all of those things. Obviously, South Africa is in a different position because we've got a lot of good infrastructure, well, in cities and stuff like that. But in rural areas where these protected areas are mostly based, there's very, very little development, schools, no work opportunities. So I think it's really important, going forward as conservationists, or as the future of conservationists, we should start thinking along those lines to say we need to really involve any community around protected areas. Just to touch, I'm not going to be long with this one. I'm also working with some communities in protection of cycads, where they give me information if someone comes and poaches a cycad or is illegally collecting cones from cycads. And with that, the incentive is they can collect some cones and pollinate and grow seedlings to sell and make money out of that. And it's working really well because that project started about 2016, I think, and poaching of cycads in that area is not really happening. So protected areas can work. Okay, they do work, but need to involve communities around them. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Do you think that we could go back to areas that we have previously protected and start working with communities there? Or do you think it's something we have to move forward in when we're creating new protected areas? Do you think we can rectify the damage that's been done already in terms of not involving local communities?
I think we should go back, because it doesn't mean that because we didn't do anything back then we shouldn't go back. And the reason I'm saying that is let's rather work on planting a new seed on the upcoming generations and fixing that problem for the future generation. Obviously, the ones that are now there and poaching, those cannot be fixed. But let's work on what's coming and sort of get rid of the lack of opportunities in those areas going forward. And I would like to believe if opportunities are created, all the young men and women that will grow up in the future will probably not take up poaching. It's very lucrative, but we'd probably have less people who go into it if there's opportunity. Unlike if we just leave it and say, okay, well, we've messed up and so be it, then the poaching doesn't stop, or the illegal collection or the illegal fishing of abalone and any other protected species will never, and it will continue. So it will be helpful to go back to the communities and engage them, do stakeholder engagements, establish some sort of structure where you can engage with the community. And most of these communities do have chiefs or leaders, traditional leaders that are leading them. And that's probably one approach that we can use. Obviously, there'll be corruption where some of the money is siphoned into someone's pocket and it doesn't really get to the communities. That's a different story. But at least we can try moving forward to say, let's involve these people. And and the thing is, some of these people suffer from human-wildlife conflict. An elephant breaks the fence and they destroy their fields of maize. And then no one is going to compensate them. The next thing, what's going to happen? They go and poach or shoot an animal or something to say, well, they're not compensating us. I've just lost a field of my crop from elephants and whatever antelope, or a leopard is taking his cattle. No one gets compensated for that. So we really need to engage with communities, teach them how to manage wildlife conflict and building bomas, how to protect your cattle from predators, So we should go back and plant the seed in the upcoming generation.
I'm not on mute anymore. This speaks to me right there, Zulake. And I think just a bit of a story. So communities are very eager to learn. Communities, and I see this from the chat, and communities are very eager to be involved in what's happening. So with our mistakes, we realize our mistakes, our past mistakes as conservationists, and we need to go back to those areas and try to rectify those mistakes. But then we also need to be aware that it's not going to take one meeting, it's not going to take 1 year, because these conflicts have wounds associated with them. I'm noting you, Naledi, I'll come to you just now. So they have wounds that are associated with them. People were forcibly removed from their land areas to proclaim protected areas. So you cannot go to a person who has that history with a protected area and just expect them to be merry and happy for a protected area in 1 day. It's going to take a process. It's going to take a negotiating back and forth until you reach an agreement, and that can take years. And again, with the history of protected areas in South Africa, this is inclusive of both marine and terrestrial. People do not trust authorities, do not trust their intentions. So if there are different stakeholders that authorities can work with, that for me, I think is another point that we as conservationists need to look at. So what are the offsets, or what are the incentives that protected areas can offer people? So, and for lack of a better word, I think I'll use this for now, sell protected areas with those incentives. So if I'm saying sell, I'm not saying lie, or just use those, make those positive incentives for people to see that having a protected area can yield this for them. So that even if you're not there as a law enforcement officer or as a conservationist, the people who are living adjacent to those areas are your guardians of those areas for you. So back to a point that you said, Zulak. So I think as conservationists, going back to this thing of collaboration again. So we have fresh organizations that are coming into conservation that have different ideas of how to make conservation acceptable to people. So we need to work as partners. We need to collaborate with different people, different stakeholders, to ensure that people see the value of protected areas. But then again, we need to be realistic. If there is value in protected areas, we can't just be going around and saying we should have a protected area. Where is the value there? So we need to be realistic as well. Just a note, Sma, you are too quiet. I will bring you into the conversation a bit later on. So have your points ready. I saw Naledi had her hand up. I don't know if she's still in the room or she's fallen off.
Hi, Sandile. I'm still on.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I just have a couple of questions. So I'm not quite clued up on conservation and conservation efforts in South Africa. But as we've been talking, I sort of been Googling a lot of stuff because I find it quite interesting. And I've seen that in South Africa, we have a few programs that work with communities and that provide incentives for communities and whatnot. So if we have so many programs, what are they not successful? Why aren't they doing well? Is it a matter of finances? Is it a managerial problem? Or in some cases, I have heard that some people will start programs maybe, and it will become like a one-time thing. So there's no follow-up on the progress. So I think in the future, for those people who work mostly with communities, maybe if we can have like identify all those problems before you even create new programs, because there's no point in having all these programs that aren't even going to work. So it's just that I think this is a very important session, and I think it's quite interesting. But if anybody has information on why these programs are not appear to not be doing well, or are they doing well, I'd be quite keen to hear more about that. Thank you.
Julia?
So from my knowledge, I personally don't know of that many programs that work like that in South Africa. I'm not very knowledgeable on all of the protected areas in South Africa. So if there are some that do it, I'd be very happy to learn about it. So I think maybe the one issue is that this hasn't in a lot of our protected areas. I mean, I've never heard of someone being allowed to go into Kruger and go and shoot a kudu, sustainably, obviously, but it's, you know, and as Zuelake, I hope I said your name right, said earlier, that's quite, when it comes to conservation areas, it's like taboo. You don't do that in a conservation area. So I don't know if it's just something that hasn't been implemented in a lot of our conservation areas, and that's why it doesn't seem successful going on. But that being said, one conservation area that I know does work with the community is the Mangalisso Wetland Park, and I'm sure Sandile will know a lot more about it than I do. I was lucky enough to go visit there last year to do some of my honors fieldwork, and it's incredible. There's a local community that lives within the protected area, and they are given education and training in order to be monitors in the area. So one of the main species that I obviously know about in the areas, because I'm from a marine background, is the nesting turtles, so the loggerhead and leatherback turtles, which nest along the coastline in the Mangalisso Wetland Park. And the local community is employed, so they're given training, they're employed to monitor where these turtles are nesting. And it's, in my opinion, from what I could see when I visited, it's a huge success, because now the community is involved and they have such a passion for what they're doing. I mean, for them, it could be very easy to poach turtles. And I mean, there is a demand for turtle eggs and turtle meat, but sitting with them and talking to them, such a passion for looking after the turtles, because now they see the value in looking after the turtles, because it provides them employment, it provides tourist revenue coming into the area. So in that sense, that protected area is, I think, a success story in terms of and helping to derive value in the protected area for the community, and in that way protecting species as well.
Armstrong?
I think this is my last comment or anything. I'd like everyone to join in. Just to provide, like, I don't know if it's 2 cents or 1 cent, but yeah, probably my 2 cents on the question that the lady asked. I think the problem that was identified in many of the talks that I've been to or attended was the problem with, firstly, funding. Funding is a great measure in terms of the efficiency of the project and the success of the project. But secondly, the longevity of that project. Some projects are funded for a period of 2 years or period of 3 years. There are no projects that are funded beyond maybe a 10-year period. So we need to try looking into programs that are that spend more time, I would say, in terms of assessing their efficiency, but also making sure that the benefits are transitioned to the communities that are identified for. But also another problem is that I find or saw with most projects is that the person or the company or organization that is running the project defines the terms or the things that the community needs according to the funding of that project. So I think with us identifying that the communities are at the forefront of everything, we should, in rolling out our project, we should involve the community so that they identify for themselves in terms of what do they need with the particular project or particular funding that we're coming with, so that there's this longevity and the efficiency is being something that we can assess over a period of time. So if you come into a community and say, okay, I'm from this organization and this and this and this, I'm going to provide you with jobs, but in the long run, it may be okay for a few period of years, but in the long run, you may see that there are certain things that are still continuing in that particular community. But then if you had the opportunity to ask the community to say, what are your needs in terms of what I'm trying to offer you? What are your needs in terms of the funding that we have for you? I think that's where we can try and see whether these projects are very efficient in rolling out the different benefits that they come with. So I think that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. And here's my 2 cents on that. So, Naledi, there is a number of projects that are happening that include communities, but like Armstrong says, Julia says, communities reap benefits from those, and it's really good. But then the problem comes with finances again. So I think the duration of the pot of funds that is there, it's only limited to a certain duration. And after 3-5 years, as an organization, you have to evolve and move with where the money is. So you identify another project of interest where funders are putting in money, and you apply for that fund, you get those funds, and you move away from this specific project to another project. So you started something good and then it ended up in the air. So, and that's how most projects die. So I think, again, going forward, what we need to look at as conservationists now and as organizations working with communities, with organizations coming up with topics to explore in communities, coming up with protection area related work, is that how do we make our project, or how do we make our work more effective or self-sustainable? So how does a project run itself beyond the duration of the project? So I think that's another key point we need to look at in all of our projects. So we need to look at financing beyond the initial 3 years, the initial 5-10 years. How does a project run that? So there's quite a number of projects, successful projects, where communities were very much engaged and communities learned and picked up very useful skills. But then after 10 years, a project fell off. So if you look at the communities of Sokulu and Wajobe, so very, I think, effective community-run projects. But then because of that problem of funds, after a long stretch, and then a project just falls off, and you back to square one where you were in a decade ago. So you have to go back now, if you go back and try to fix from the bottom up. So we really, I think the major issue is of funding and funds drying up. But I'm very hopeful there is a drive to look at projects being self-sustainable or beyond the project's scope or the project duration. So I think that's another really key point we need to look at. To answer you, Camille, there, I don't know if there are any studies that have looked at the efficiency of projects. So I think it's a known fact, but I don't think it's been quantified, or I think so. That's one thing that needs really working on. I don't know if anyone in the audience has an answer to that. Julia?
Sorry, I'm talking a lot today. To answer that question, I'm busy looking now. Last year that compared protected areas in Kenya, protected areas where there was no community involvement, no, very strict conservation area, and then other areas where communities were allowed to be involved, were allowed sustainable harvesting and were employed. And it compared the actual loss of species and the loss of, loss of animals between these two conservation areas. And saw that there was very much a decline in the conservation areas where there was no community involvement. So I'm just busy trying to have a look and see if I can find that journal article for you.
Please do, if you find it, do share it with us here in the link below here. So just to add on that as well, not so long ago, I got a chance to take part in film making, learning how to make films for environmental films. And the people I was with in that program, I got really interesting insight. So I think this comes back after a point that was raised about engaging communities and ensuring that there are incentives for the communities in ensuring protection. So there's a gentleman I was with. He works with for a leopard monitoring organization in Kenya, and he says there is wildlife conflict. So that's another point why I'm going back to this with leopards in Kenya, because they are mostly herdsmen, so they live very closely with their cattle, and it's not just small numbers of cattle. You're looking at in excess of over 50 to 100 goats. There's cows as well. So they really rely on their cattle for currency and economy. For them, it's not just for fun. It's livelihoods in terms of money and food. So he says, even though there's those conflicts, the people, because of the incentives that came with ensuring sustainable living together with those animals, leopards, they are not killing them as much as they were before. They've instead they're looking at alternative ways to deter them from their cattle crowds and their cattle keeps. So just to reaffirm that incentives do really work and engagement does really work. To further strengthen that engagement really does work. He says for years they were looking for black leopards in Kenya, and studies said there were no black leopards. But then he came and he got the information on where to find a black leopard in Kenya from an old man from the community who said there was a black leopard in their area. And nobody believed him, thought he's old, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Just by chance, he came back that night, the young man, and he found a black leopard by the cattle kraal, using the information the young man told him about. So if you engage with people, there's definitely things that you pick up from them, and they pick up things from you as well. That's my 2 cents. I see you've unmuted yourself, Simone.
Hey, Sandile. I was just going to say this. I see there's some comments in the chat. I'm keeping quiet in the background here because I haven't been part of the conversation to date as yet. I've joined late, but yeah, I see there's some comments in the chat here.
Yeah. It's a very interesting conversation that's happening here, and really thought-provoking points being raised. Yeah.
Good.
So, if I think I need someone to just reel me back. Which questions have we answered? Which have we not? What are other questions from you guys? I have some questions on my side, but I'll take questions from you for now. Points which we've not answered, clarifications, and not overlooking you, Ma. I still need you to have something to say here, because I know you work very closely with communities, so we like your view on all of this.
I don't think there are any unanswered questions in the chat. I think there have been points raised and counter raised, which are very interesting, actually. But yeah.
So yeah, interesting. Sorry about that, Sma. Internet really sucks. Oh yeah, that's another point I had to raise. I saw Franny said there might be load shedding at 4. So if you haven't charged your laptop, your phones, just put them up there, and yeah, so that you're not left without power. So there's a chance we might be cut off for, but in essence, this session ends at 4, really. So shouldn't affect us as much. So I had another question prepared for, well, not question, rather a discussion point. So in our introduction, I did introduce Justice for Jaws as a group for protecting sharks and changing perceptions. And we know that sharks in South Africa have a negative, so mainly negative, people view sharks negatively in South Africa, largely because of, I think, media spreading the negative stories more than the positive stories. And because people are raised to fear sharks, really. They are predators out at sea, and we think of them as on a hunt for humans. So we fear them. So my next question was, should we afford any protection to apex predators, so sharks, lions, and your big cats. Because we've been talking and saying that we need to engage communities, and we need to be inclusive of the information that comes from communities. And information that comes from communities is they are scared of these large predators. And on land, we spoke about human-wildlife conflicts, mainly driven by these predators. So, should we be protecting them at all?
Thank you. Yes, we should. If you think about it, for tourism purposes, the big cats are the main attraction. When people want to come to South Africa, they want to see the lion, or Africa rather. They want to see the lion, they want to see the leopard, which most of them don't. They want to see your elephants, they want to see your big five, you know. However, in so doing, we shouldn't neglect the not so cuddly and hairy species, because they also need to be afforded protection, particularly. So what we should do is rather prioritize which species to protect, but not based on what they look like, but based on their level of threats. You know, we cannot all be focusing our energy, our conservation energies on just the big and hairy. There's a lot of other animals that need protection. For example, reptiles. I work a lot with reptiles again. Reptiles are frequently smuggled out of the country to the Asian countries, you know. Again, cycads. There's a lot, you know, in conservation, what I've noticed, there's huge plant blindness. It's because something is a plant, we actually don't care. We just want to talk about the animals, you know. So every threatened animal or plant should be afforded the equal protection and warranted protection, not just protection for because it's big and hairy. It needs to be warranted, you know, and it needs to make sense. We can't. There's I forgot this term where people go into conservation, but emotional. I don't want to say emotional conservation, but use science to back protection of a certain species, not because we like it. It's cute and hairy and blah blah blah. No, use informed decision. How many population it has? Is it in a small copy? Is it an isolated population? How many of them do they have? What are the threats? Is it threatened by use from humans? Is it also threatened by habitat loss? Is it also threatened by global warming? So you see all those threats actually now make the species a more suitable species for protection. Whereas if a species is just threatened by habitat loss and not by use or climate change affects everyone, but I'm just using examples right now, you know. So we need to weigh which species to protect and why do we protect them, and not just focus everything on the big and hairies. You know, the plants need love too, and reptiles. Thank you.
Very much agree with you there. I'll do a recap of that. Sma?
Thank you, Sandile. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Okay, so it's a question and then it's a comment, and it links very much to what Uzolaki has just touched on. So my question is that when we're speaking of protecting sharks, and the premise is that people, especially communities, are afraid of sharks, and they have these misconceptions about sharks being dangerous and out to get them. So my question then becomes, how do we link the fear that people have for sharks with sharks being threatened? Because as far as I know and how I've lived and interacted with people, if I'm afraid of something, then I will try by all means to avoid that particular thing. So I won't go out of my way to hunt it and to destroy it. I will just try to just stay away from it, which would explain a lot why a lot of Black people are not big in water spaces. You won't find a lot of people, Black people diving, swimming, etc., because of these fears for predators like sharks. So my question then becomes, how are we linking the fear that people have for sharks with sharks being threatened, and then now come to ask, should we protect sharks? Right? And then based on what Uzwelakhe just said about prioritizing species for protection and not only focusing on the charismatic species, I really feel that at this point, where we are in terms of conservation efforts, etc., I think we should be at a point where we're not just prioritizing specific species, but we should be looking at an ecosystem-based approach to protect ecosystems instead of specific species, because every time we focus on a species, it's always going to be at the detriment of another. And then we're going to find that we are now fighting for resources for each specialist or each person who has a bond or a passion or a love for an animal, will then now fight for resources to conserve this specific animal, but then we what's the word? We neglect the others in the ecosystem. Whereas if we look at an entire ecosystem as a whole and protect an ecosystem, then by default, we are protecting everything within that ecosystem that is supported by that ecosystem. And that lends us to benefiting more from the environment in terms of ecosystem services, because without one species or without one plant, without one tree or one biome or whatever, then everything else will crumble, and then we won't reap the benefits of conservation in that sense. So I think we really should be at a point where we're moving away from species-specific conservation and look at ecosystem-based conservation efforts.
Well said there. So, oh yes, Julia, I'll recognize you. So well said there, Sma. Well said there again, Zolake. And I think to merge the 2 points you guys are raising is that, Zolake, what I'm hearing is that we should be protecting these species, but then if anything at all, they should be used as motivation to protect everything that falls under them. Because again, if you look at me, I'll pay no attention. Well, I am a conservationist now, so every species matter. But before that, if you looked at me, I would pay no attention to a frog. If anything, it was a nuisance to me. But then, now that you touched on how many of them are being smuggled out of the country and no one pays attention to them because no one really cares about them. They're not cute and cuddly. They're not big. So anyone who loves a frog is a person who really loves a frog, who loves reptiles. Other than that, no one cares about them. So if you protect the big and cuddly species that are in the same habitat with those frogs, with those reptiles, and in essence, you protect a whole ecosystem because you're protecting the one that we care about, and you're protecting everything that comes under it. So that's what I'm getting from you there, Zulake. And that, for me, agrees with what Sma is saying. We shouldn't be using one species. We should be protecting all species. We shouldn't be using one species to protect, and neglecting all others. We should be looking at an entire ecosystem. And then a question I would pose there then is, how do we then educate people to look at these structures holistically and not as individual species? So look at it from an ecosystem basis and understand that. Is that a job we are ready for? Is that something we can do? How do we do it? So I'll leave that question there. And then going to your question, and by no means am I an expert in this. It's just that I've been afforded this much power to speak more than any one of you. So, in terms of sharks, I think it's not a matter, and I really much agree with your point there. It made me laugh. Black people, you rarely find them in water. I have this friend who never goes to water, and he is my friend. As a qualified marine biologist, I bring him to water, and he'll just stand there. It's not even going to deep water, just going to the beach. He'll just stand there in the sidewalk and just say, "You go, you'll find me back here." And that's how he is, really. And I've tried. So people fear what they don't know, and they don't go to what they fear. So that's why you don't find most black people in water. So the case for fear, also, I think the case there is not so much that sharks are threatened because people do not know that much about them, so they are targeting them. But then it's because people don't know that much about them, and they pay no attention to them and the threats that they are facing. So you don't have the public outcry and the public the motivation and the support as conservation agencies to make your case for protecting this species head. So if you say sharks are under attack from humans, a general person won't understand that. Like, how are they under attack when they are the ones attacking us? So you then first need to change the learning from that person, get them to understand what the threat is and how they can help. So get them behind a motivation to ensure that sharks are protected from what? So the number of threats that they are facing: overfishing, illegal fishing, and all of them. The list is very long. So that when you make a case, you have public numbers to show that this is really an issue. So I think that's where the problem is. Not so much that people who do not know or people who don't afford that much protection are part of the problem. The part of the problem is with them not being part of the conversation. The conversation is not happening, basically. Julia, and then Simone.
Said what I was going to say. So I was going to say basically the same thing. If you're scared of sharks, you mentioned that you want to avoid them, which I completely understand. I mean, if I'm scared of lions, I'm not going to run up to a lion. But the problem with that is, if you're scared of sharks, you don't care about them. You don't care. And that, I think, is the problem. Because if you want to avoid them and you don't care about them, when it turns around like Justice for Jaws and says, "Oh my gosh, there's a massive problem, there's 70%, or I don't know the statistic, of sharks are endangered," or there's really horrible numbers that you hear about how much overfishing is happening, endangered and stuff like that. If you don't care about it, then you're not going to participate in discussions. You're not going to want to try and help. So I think in terms of the apex predators, that fear is maybe creating a sense of apathy. Like, I'm scared of sharks, so I don't really to them. Whereas conservation efforts going towards them, which is great, but, and this was also mentioned, you can't pick and choose what you want to conserve. You have to be willing to conserve the frog, the lizards, but you also have to be willing to conserve the stuff that is scary but is super important. So yeah, I think Sandile put it really well.
Simone, you have your hand up.
Hi, I'm an old person. Am I allowed to speak here? I can't remember what the rules are.
You are, I think, the only silverback amongst us.
Silverback, you can't call me that yet. Come on. I'm 41. Just over the hill. I'm not a silverback. Okay, I'll try to keep it.
Simon, you are allowed to speak.
Thanks. Thanks, Sandile. I appreciate that. So it was just kind of, I didn't hear the question. I snuck out to make a cup of tea, but just commenting on Sma's comments on ecosystem versus species conservation. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind for me there. The first is, which I know very little about, but I know the importance of it, is the ecological importance of certain species. Like every species is part of the mix, right? But actually some have a bigger impact on the ecosystem than others if they're removed. So that has to be taken into consideration. Then it's also about the language that humans speak. So I know that a lot of conservation of ecosystems happens because people care about, for example, elephants. Sharks is not one of them. Sharks is a different one because it's a scary and it's got a bad sort of culture perception. But people, you know, there's a lot of land in Africa that's being protected because people love elephants and they're big and they need a big range. And so, you know, it's about also understanding the human dynamic and what humans actually care about. You know, and also they might not understand the concept of ecosystems, but they can understand that they love elephants and they want to be able to see them in the wild, right? So I'm just saying one has to keep that in mind. Then linked to that is people's, and it came up in some of our campaign developments around these things, is human beings are selfish. We are not a species that really is altruistic, and we try to be, some of us, but in the end we all want our own needs to be met. And you know, so when you're thinking about how to protect species, it's also about making sure that either people understand how that species is important to them and their survival and their well-being, but also, that what they need in that situation is taken into consideration. Like I was in a meeting the other day about whether to drop fences in Kruger Park, and there was somebody there who actually lived right on the border of that game reserve, and they're like, you know, I wouldn't go outside my home if that fence was down because I'm really scared of lions, and that's understandable. Last point is linked to that is, you know, with all of these conversations, we have lost the ability to engage in those ecosystems. You know, people in the past and in other parts of Africa still live in harmony, relative harmony, certainly in a terrestrial space, with all the species there. You know, they know how to deal with elephants. They know where the risks of lions are. You know, some of those species roam relatively freely amongst humans, but there's certain places where those boundaries have been put up, and the disconnection from nature means that a lot of people just don't know how to engage anymore at all. And so the fear is an absolute barrier. So I don't really have a stance on it. I'm just saying these are the kinds of things that have come up for me in this conversation. Last thing quickly, we cannot underestimate just how selfish human beings are. So in all of these decisions, think, okay, how can I communicate this in such a way that the person thinks that they're getting what they need? All of us, including me.
100%. This just brought about a film again. It's amazing how much of an effect film has on me now. So that I watched, it's called Korongoza. It addresses both human-wildlife conflicts and the offsets or the incentives that help people want to be custodians of a protected area. So I think it's available on YouTube. If you haven't watched it, if you find a chance, please look for it. It's our Korongoza. Zolake. You are muted.
Sorry. But just one last comment, because I see we're almost out of time. I want to agree with Smane. Sometimes, and not only with sharks, you'd find there's a skink in the house and everyone wants to get a broom and kill it, or a lizard. So generally, people are afraid of critters or any other animals, if it's besides the sharks and stuff. So what I do in my house, you're not allowed to kill anything, even a cockroach. No one is allowed to kill anything in this space. So, and the reason I tell them is that every living organism has a niche, and it's got a purpose why it's there. Well, cockroaches are associated with dirt or something like that, but I'm just saying, like, every living organism has a right to live, and we shouldn't be killing stuff or animals just for fun. However, we can still use those that are usable sustainably, you know. I don't know what animals are used for, but for example, with plants, people harvest your wild ginger because it's used in traditional medicine. We can still use that. However, one needs to be cognizant of the fact that they don't need to harvest all that they see, but just take what you need. If you need 3 bulbs of African potato, just take 3 bulbs, not take all of them, and then next year there's no bulbs for other people to come harvest. So yeah, guys, I enjoyed the session, and that was just my last comment. Thank you.
Yeah, very much agreed there. And I think a phrase to tie that up is what my grandmother used to say. If you kill a frog, be ready to deal with the insect. So yeah, you remove one, know there's going to be reactions that are mostly going to pester you. Yeah. So I think, guys, I really enjoyed this engagement right here, and you guys really came to the party through the chat, through the comments, through the reactions, and thank you again for your patience with the technical problems that we are facing. Yeah, there's still a number of you here, and you stayed throughout. So thank you, guys. That's it from me. We will try and compile this, and I think Franny will post it in the end. I'm not sure, but I think, yeah. If there's anything from you guys, please fire away. Otherwise, from me to you guys, thank you very much for an engaging session, and the conversation does not end here. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandile.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Remember, thank you guys. There is another similar session, same time tomorrow. So yeah, looking forward to that one as well.
Just quickly before you go, Camille, I'm busy putting our social media in the chat. If anyone would like to follow us and engage with us, it'll be there.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so they are at Justice for Jaws. Thank you, guys. You have yourselves a lovely remainder of the day and evening, unless you want me to stay with me here and we continue this.